Hello and welcome back to another episode of the Breathe Better podcast. So in our last in our last episode, we had our special guest Jake Gordon on with us, chatting away about his life, breathwork, and a couple of other bits and bobs. It was a really, really interesting conversation. It was actually the first time me and him had ever spoke, and it's the first time I'd had someone on the podcast, so that was really cool. One thing I found about it was that it was quite difficult being someone who was asking questions and trying to word questions that I've never asked before to someone in a pointed way, in the sense of how to get an actual human answer out of someone. Because sometimes I know I can ask questions or word things in such a way that they don't really make sense. Let's be real. So with that being said, it was really great to have him on the podcast and to get another male perspective from the wellness industry as well. And the reason that I was asking him, about male stereotypes within the sort of wellness industry and then what ones he may have encountered or if he ever felt like he had to confine to them or anything like that. And he gave me a really good response, which is that he has always sort of gone to the beat of his own drum, and that is such a way to be, a very inspirational way to be. And it really was a really great conversation, talking to him about all that. But the reason that I wanted to ask that was because that I think that it's important for men to share their point of views, right? Men aren't exactly very big talkers now, are we? We don't really talk about our emotions. We don't really talk about what's going on. And it's just interesting that he shared a similar sort of stereotype that I can quite relate to as well. So he was sharing about how, there's this sort of, for guys, everything has to be really challenging. If it's not challenging, it's not worthwhile doing. And it's like, I totally agree. And it's the same within the yoga world as well. A lot of the male faces of the yoga world are like ripped absolute shreds, right? They're really, really fit. They're really, really active. All of the practices are like 110%. They're really challenging. And their main focus is always about strength, right? It's about strength and it's not about softness. Now, this is a lot of the things I've seen. Once again, I've not had the pleasure of conversating with most of these people. I would love to talk to them at some point and, for one, understand how they have the fucking discipline to make, to keep up with that. But this is just an outsider point of view, right? Because, as I say, I've not spoken to any of these people. But I think it's good to get a look behind the lens, so to speak, behind the scenes, as to what other men in the wellness industry, or if it's yoga or breathwork or meditation or sound baths or whatever it is, or aromatherapy or just anything, massage, I think it's really important to get their views and their thoughts, and to see if there's any, I guess, similarities from place to place. And I think it's really important that we share openly about stuff. So yeah, I might not get everything right. I might gloss over some things, and I might just, I might not get everything right. And I think that's important as well. It's that we can voice our opinions and look for other opinions and get other people's stories and talk about things. I think the main thing that men within wellness and yoga and whatever, and just in general, like in fucking general, we need to be able to create more lines of communication with each other that are more open. They're softer. They're about emotion. They're about thoughts. They're about what we're struggling with. They're about what we're proud of, instead of just about, yeah, I'm alright, and then just the small things, right? So I think this is something I'm really fucking passionate about, and I think it's amazing to see all of these Menswork groups, right? Men's circles and all this sort of stuff popping up. Now, I have my own opinions on them that I'm not going to share overly here, because I'm a firm believer in this stuff, right? I think it's really great. I think a lot of the stuff with Menswork is really, really great. I think some of it's maybe not quite as perfect, let's say, as it could be, but we're all human. It's a real world. Not everything's fucking perfect. Now, as I've said before, I am a big believer in therapy, personal therapy, talking therapy, art therapy, any form of therapy. I'm a big advocate for this, especially within men and everyone. We should go to therapy. We should look at ourselves. We should reflect. We should create that open line of communication with each other. We should allow ourselves to be vulnerable and be held and supported in this way where we're opening up in a therapeutic space and we're held properly and safely. And within doing so, talking with maybe our partner might get a little bit easier, and understanding that some of our reactions maybe are coming from somewhere else other than just complete anger and complete rage, right? So that's definitely a male stereotype, is that we're all very angry. We don't have emotions. We just process things through anger. We get angry and fucking rah, you know what I mean? Like, that's not how it works. It is how it works nowadays, because that's what we've been conditioned to do, and that's what we've been taught to do, is to just be angry, and then that's it released. But that's not the case. It's definitely not the case, and we need to be able to communicate more openly about these things. And I think that was what was so great about having Jake on, was being able to ask him certain questions and getting honest answers, instead of these sort of, answers about what he thought I wanted to hear. It was just honest answers about what he thought and his own story, and that was absolutely fantastic. So I'm really looking forward to having more voices on the podcast as well. I think it'll be really, really great to get a big variety of different voices. Not necessarily all male, of course, like just whoever. I think it would be really, really good. And as much as we were talking about breathwork in his context and a lot of his story, I really, really like the systematic approach that he was talking about. So if you didn't listen to the podcast with Jake in it, I'd maybe have a little listen, but I'll sort of summarize the systematic point of view that he was talking about. And really, I was so happy that I pointed this out, and a lot of the other things that he was talking about within breathwork as well. So one of the things is that we don't want to get chucked in at the deep end and expect to swim. I mentioned those exact words, but it's true for yoga, it's true for breathwork, it's true for exercise, it's true for fucking everything. So, we need to take things step by step. And as much as I mentioned this about consistency and taking things slow, but it's true with breathwork and it's true with pranayama. So systematics and taking things step by step, and actually making the person who's coming to the class or you're coaching or whatever it is that you're doing with them, if it's yoga or breathwork or meditation, but making them feel like they're getting every bit of information they need. Really building on the foundations, the fundamentals, is really important. Really, really important. Like, you wouldn't go to a beginner's yoga class and then get told how to handstand straight away, or be expected to be able to do a handstand, for example, or like a twisted, revolved triangle pose, or a half-bound, standing moon pose. Like, you wouldn't be expected to do these things. So why is it when we come to breathwork or meditation classes or pranayama classes, we're expected to be able to do the more intermediate things without an understanding of what we should be looking for or feeling, or without knowing or being taught the fundamentals and the foundations of what we're looking for? And one of the main things that you'll hear in a yoga class is that your breath is the most important part. Especially if you go to a vinyasa class, you'll probably hear this churned out, but with very little instruction told about how you should be breathing and where you should be feeling your breath and the space that it's occupying and the mechanics of your breathing. So I think that's really, really important, and we need to take this step by step and inform people. So within going forward with the rest of this episode, I would like to talk a little bit more about pranayama. So, sorry, the cat is on my legs and she's trying to distract me. So I'd like to talk a little bit about pranayama, and I guess just some roots and stuff and bits and bobs about pranayama as a whole. And the first thing I'm going to share is a quote from the Hatha Yoga Pradipika, and I'll talk a little bit about that as well. And unfortunately, I can't pronounce the Sanskrit for this yet, I'm afraid. So the quote essentially goes, when the breath moves, the mind moves. When the breath is without movement, the mind is without movement. The yogi who masters vayu obtains steadiness. So essentially, the yogi, or the person who masters their breath and the winds of the breath, obtains steadiness. And, this is really, really important. That steadiness, that stability is what can be gained from a really consistent yoga practice and consistent pranayama or breathwork practice. It is stability of mind, it's stability and adaptability as well of your nervous system. It's being able to cope with the stresses and cope with what comes up. And also, as I was talking about in a previous episode, about having that relationship with yourself, with your breath again. So we're so out of sync with ourselves nowadays. Like, everything's done for us. We have an app for everything. We have an app to remind us how much water we need to drink. We have and I'm guilty of this as well, I have a watch telling me my heart rate. I have a watch telling me how much sleep I should get. When really we should be listening to our bodies and feeling into what we need. Our lack of interoception nowadays is quite astounding. And it could have always been that way. It genuinely could have. But we have all of these tools nowadays, technology, to help us with that. But I've totally lost track of what the fuck I was talking about. I'm not going to lie. Steadiness. So, no, I've totally lost track. Anyway, just going back to pranayama. So, in practicing this, you'll obviously master and obtain a bit of steadiness, be that emotionally, mentally, all of this sort of stuff. Yeah? So, when practiced with consistency, once again, it all comes back to consistency. Yeah? Now, what does pranayama mean, essentially? Because it's not as simple as breath work. It's quite an off-putting term, I think. I have noticed if I label something as a breath work something class or whatever, it gets a little bit more response, a little bit more engagement. If I label it as a pranayama thing, which is essentially the same thing, just under a different name, under the name that I want to call it, as that's honouring its roots, because that's what it fucking is, because I'm teaching it from a yogic lens, it gets much less engagement. So what is pranayama? Obviously, it's made up of two words, essentially. So prana, which is energy. Well, not necessarily just energy, it is that which moves. Okay, so it's that which brings movement into things. Yeah, it is life essence, so to speak. It is the breath of life. It's your vitality. It's bioelectricity within the body. It is so much. It is the energy, essentially, that I think that makes up everything. So talking about, going back to the Yoga Sutras, this sort of Puruja and Prakriti sort of stuff, it's, the Puruja would be your consciousness, right? Your very root consciousness. And then your prana would it would be what brings life into that. And it is in, plants, it's in animals, it's in anything, as I say, that has life. Absolutely anything. It is your vital force. It's your breath. It's your mind. It's the organising principle of creation, which is a really nice way to put it as well. Now, our yama essentially means to lengthen, expand, direct or control. Yeah. So pranayama in its essence is the lengthening, expanding or directing of prana, or our breath. Yeah. So essentially, to begin with, it starts with your breath. And then once you get further into your more intermediate sort of practices, it becomes a little bit more about manipulating energy and that lengthening, expanding or directing of your own energies. Yeah. So I think within yoga nowadays, everything's very asana based, everything's very movement based, and it's, for me, I believe very strongly that pranayama and meditation is one of the most crucial parts of yoga practice. It's absolutely essential. It's essential for so many different reasons, but for me, it's essential for that, for the yogic path into that deepening of an understanding of myself. It's essential for the path of self-discovery. It's essential for the furthering of your own spirituality, and you're furthering into these understandings of, what Patanjali is talking about. It's getting back to that root source. So it's working with the body in this way. Yeah, so we're using our movement to release tension through the body, and then we're being able to sit for longer. So we have your asana, and then we have your pranayama. Yeah, so you're lengthening and expanding the body in certain postures and ways to release tension and to be able to, for your body to be supple and strong and flexible and all this sort of stuff. So you can sit, so you can use your breath you can control your breath to lengthen it, expand it, direct energy in certain places. You can purify, you can stimulate, you can cool, you can harmonize, all with the breath, to then lead you into deeper states of meditation. And that's how I see my methodology of yoga, is movement to breath to meditation to stillness. Now, obviously it would take a very long time to get from point A to point D, or whatever, point Z, because there's a lot to work on in ourselves. Yeah, there's a lot to work on in our movements and our, physically. We're not very active creatures nowadays, for example, all of us anyway. And I'm totally getting off point here, but essentially what I'm trying to say is the methodology of pranayama. So pranayama is the lengthening, expanding of our vital force, of our breath. It's controlling the breath to manipulate our energy and our states, essentially. So you can use pranayama to increase your focus. You can use it, as I say, to harmonize, to cool, to stimulate, to purify, to heat the physical body. You can use it for many different reasons, but essentially the main focus should be for peeling back the layers of the self to get to the source, so to speak. Yeah. And in a much more modern lens, it's an enhancement for life. It's an enhancement of your whole bodily system, your hormonal system, your mental body, your focus, your memory. It's really, really good for all this stuff. It's not really done much for my memory, I'll be perfectly honest, but it probably takes quite a lot to do something for my memory. But your respiratory system, your cardiovascular system, just your lymphatic system, so much. It can enhance almost every area of your life, from exercise to all of this stuff that I'm talking about, to be able to focus more, to find a little bit more peace, or release a little bit more stress from your life. And it is such a shame that it seems to be missed out in a lot of yoga teachings nowadays in the West. There's such a focus on movement that I just think it's a shame. There's so much within pranayama, and there's so much to be learnt through it, and there's so much to be experienced through it. Some of the most profound experiences I've had with yoga have been through pranayama and mantra, very subtle practices, but with such a profound and potent effect. Physically, emotionally, mentally, spiritually, all wrapped into one. There's something about these practices that keeps me coming back. And of course, I still practice asana. But this is the meat, the meat of the pudding, so to speak, or the fruit of the pudding, or whatever the fuck you like in your pudding. This is it. It's the pranayama, it's the meditation, it's the mantra, it's the vibrational, subtle qualities of these things that bring you back to your source, that bring you back to this universal energy, so to speak. And I guess that's the difference between, I don't know the difference between what, but that's the difference between maybe my methodology to someone else's, so to speak. I don't know. Anyway, so that's your pranayama. Well, that's how I view pranayama anyway. So one thing I'd also like to point out is the history of pranayama, right? So obviously, you guys all know I am fucking obsessed with pranayama and breathwork and this sort of stuff, because I think, as I've just said, for all of those reasons, I think it's absolutely wonderful. Now, it's fucking old. Okay? It didn't just come about yesterday. And I think it's brilliant that there's a lot of breathwork facilitation popping up all over the place. One thing I'm not a fan of is Wim Hof. I'm just going to go out there and put that out there right now. I don't like it. I don't like that system. I've tried it, and I just, it doesn't sit with me personally. It probably is brilliant for a lot of people. I don't like it. So, history of pranayama, right? So, pranayama dates all the way back to the Vedic period, which is about 5000 BCE. Within its Indian dates, Western dates, that's about 1500, to 800 BCE. Personally, I would be more inclined to go with the Indian date, seeing as that's where the practice came from, the Indus Valley civilization and all of that. So, yeah, fucking old, right? Really, really old, essentially. It's been talked about an awful lot. It's mentioned in the Upanishads, it's mentioned in, obviously, Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, it's mentioned in the Hatha Yoga Pradipika. These are obviously a little bit more recent, but, back then, if you go back to the Vedic and the Upanishadic period, so all those, thousands of years ago, the oldest points, prana was very much viewed as like this universal life force, and there's such an emphasis on ritual. It's used with like religious ceremonies, for example, and used to harmonize oneself with the cosmos, right? There wouldn't be any like breath holding or ratios or purifying practices. It would just be to connect back with yourself. So realistically, God knows what they were doing, but it was essentially still pranayama. So within the Yoga Sutra period, if we fast forward all this way, it sort of becomes a practice with a science within a science of liberation. There's a couple of different types of pranayama that are introduced, and the repetition of Om is abandoned, so to speak. Well, it's not necessarily abandoned, but it's used a little bit less, and there becomes an emphasis on the cessation of breath, okay? So breath holds, kumbhakas, retentions, all this sort of stuff. Fast forward once again to the Hatha Yoga period. This is when the sort of forthcoming of physical postures started to arise. So in the Hatha Pradipika, there was, I can't remember the exact number, it's between 10 to 14 different asanas were mentioned, and it was told that Shiva actually shared like 84,000 or 840,000 different asanas, but these was like the fruit of the pudding that I was talking about earlier, And within this, it talks about the 8 varieties of pranayamas with the bandhas and retentions and mudras and all that sort of stuff. And it also puts a big emphasis on the physiological benefits of practicing them. And it also introduces some new terminology, So within the Hatha point, it becomes a little bit of more of an interest in the subtle channels and physiologically speaking sort of stuff, like what are the benefits of doing this. It becomes less about the mind and sort of reconnecting with the universe, and it becomes a little bit more about the body. Okay, there is a reason for this that I will go into once I go into the proper history of yoga and the different sects of beliefs and all this and sort of stuff, because I will touch on that at one point as well, because I think it's absolutely fascinating. Essentially, that's where we are. So, it's been around for thousands of years, pranayama, and it's as far as I'm concerned, it's not going anywhere. It might be called something different. It might have a different label or a different title, but I think it's really important to pay an homage to where this stuff comes from, And instead of just watering down practices and watering down traditions and taking this element and that element from here, there, and everywhere and trying to combine them and then use your own nice little humble name to put them in a package, we need to acknowledge where they're coming from, We need to acknowledge all of the thousands of years of tradition and passing down of this information. And let's be honest, if it wasn't worth passing down, it wouldn't be here. Same with many other practices, many other philosophies, a lot of things in the world. If it wasn't meant to be passed down, it wouldn't have been passed down. So, pranayama, fucking important. One of the most integral parts of yoga. Okay? So, if you haven't practiced it, familiarise yourself. If you want to know more about it, keep coming back, because I'm going to keep talking about it. If you have any questions, you're welcome to message me and answer me through any social media platform, email, whatever. Look at my website. It's all there. Okay? So, I'm not going to go too much further into this, because I can feel myself going into about 16 different tangents here. So within this, I hope I've given you at least an understanding of like what pranayama is, right, and how it fits into the yogic lens, and or what it is within a yogic lens. Obviously, a lot of people think it's just breath work. Hopefully, I've enlightened you a little bit to that. Like, there's more to it, right? There's more. Don't know. I keep wanting to say fruit of the pudding, but let's just forget that analogy, shall we? So, or metaphor, whatever. But yeah, there's much more to it. It's not just about breathing. It's about life force. It's about your beliefs. It's about connecting with that universal source, in my opinion. It's about stilling the fluctuations of the mind and being able to sit in that meditative space, because you've worked through the breath. You've made your nervous system relax. You've made it able to adapt to situations, and you're more familiar with how your breath responds to certain emotions. So if certain thoughts pop up when you're meditating, you know how to relax them and observe and sit back. There's much more could be said about this. And yeah, it's all super important on the path of yoga, depending on your lineage and your sort of main focus, of course. But if you're listening, please give it a try at the very least. Please try and at least sit with it for a month. Like, find a practice. If you're looking for a protocol, I have them. Just ask me. Like a set sequence to follow, just ask me. I'm happy to share them with you. Yeah, total tangents now. So, once again, thanks very much for listening, and I hope this was even remotely understandable at this point. And going back to just sort of summarise over the stuff that I was talking about to begin with, open communication and men in yoga, wellness, breathwork, sound baths, whatever it is, let's talk to each other. Yeah, let's get a little bit more chatty with each other. I get really fucking nervous when I'm talking to anyone in general, never mind another guy. I don't know what it is. I'm sure I'll find out in therapy one day. It definitely needs to be explored. And I think it's interesting that Jake mentioned something kind of similar. So yeah, let's open this up a little bit, shall we? So thanks very much for listening to yet another episode of the Breathe Better podcast. The tree that I planted, not the tree that I physically planted, the tree that I funded for each guest coming on the podcast will be put in the description of that actual podcast. So once the tree that I funded for Jake or for Everyday Breath, once that's planted and actually there, I'll pop the link in his description. There's a link straight to my ecology page where you can look at all of the sort of stuff, all of the plants, trees and bits and bobs we've done so far with the Breathe Better project. And if you're interested in that, then have a look at my website. So once again, thanks very much for listening, and and you will hear my voice again soon. So thanks very much, and have a wonderful rest of your day.